So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Work Scotland. I'm your host this evening, Babs. So just wanted to say hi to everyone and thank you for all for coming along, especially if it's your first time. We do have a code of conduct, and it basically covers just being respectful to each other so that we all have a lovely experience tonight. We have a lovely speaker with us tonight talking about Fail to Learn, How We Get Better by Doing It Wrong with Scott Provence. So Scott is the author of the #1 new release book, Fail to Learn, a Manifesto for Training Gamification. So without further ado, Scott, if you want to take over.
Hi, everyone. Well, thanks so much for the introduction, and I want to thank everyone for joining today, and for Seth and Donald and Barbara for hosting this great group. I'm really excited to be talking through this. This is a topic that I'm really excited about. It's something I've been researching for the past 8-9 months, almost a year, maybe even. I have some really cool results to share. I was actually just sharing with the group before we got started. Some of my current clients are starting to implement some of the things that I'll be talking about, and we're getting some early metrics and results that are really exciting. So I will without trying to give too much away for specific clients, share a little bit about what we're seeing and how that ties in with this idea of fail-based learning, which is what I'm here to talk about. I'm coming to you from Reno, Nevada. I'm actually just about to move up to Seattle, so I saw someone on the chat had posted that they're from Seattle, so I'm very excited to be moving up there. Nevada is also one of the battleground election states, so we have no idea what's happening with our own statewide election yet. So I'm sure everyone's kind of on pins and needles as we are as well. But very excited to be here, and can't wait to find a time to come back to Scotland as well. It's one of my favorite places to travel. So here's, wanted to pop on my video and say hi very quickly, but I do actually have some slides that I want to share. I didn't even mention this earlier to Barbara and Seth and Donald, but I'm happy to share these slides as well, so we can figure out a way to get those available for you guys. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and talk a little bit about this idea of failure to learn. So getting a thumbs up that you guys can see this okay? All right, awesome, thumbs up, perfect. So here's what I am hoping to cover in the next hour or so. I will totally be around afterwards to answer questions too as they come in, and I'll keep my eyes on the chat as well. I'm really excited to look at why we fear failure, and specifically I'll be coming to this from a training, learning, and development point of view. Why are we so scared of failure, specifically when it comes to professional settings? This was kind of the initial question I set out to answer for myself and for my learning groups last year. As I was doing my research, I was finding some really interesting numbers around what we think the normal rate of failure should be. And so I've started to come up with these ideas of failure ratios, failure rates, failure costs. And by the time we're done with this talk, I want to introduce this concept of what I call a failure loop, and the way that we can create failure loops in organizations to actually create more fail-forward environments that increase reflection, environments that increase self-efficacy. And this is really where we're starting to see in my current clients some of these really cool metrics where people are really taking off and learning a lot more at a lot faster of a rate. So it's a little bit of our objectives. If you have other objectives that you're really interested in, or that you really came to this talk to learn about, keep them in mind, or throw them in the chat to remind yourself later on, and certainly happy to circle back around to those as well. In the meantime, I want to start this by asking you guys a little quiz question here. There's no right answer. I should say this for anyone who's test anxious. But go ahead and put your answer for this question in the chat. When is the best time for a multiple choice test? A, only at the start of a course, B, at both the start and the end, C, only at the end, or D, never. Don't let the fact that I'm asking you a multiple choice question at the start of this skew your results at all. That is not intentional. But I would love to hear if anyone can throw in, oh, we got some B's, D, excellent. A lot of B's, very cool. So both start and the end. I saw a couple for maybe just only at the start. D, never, a couple of nevers. Very interesting. All right, 10 more seconds for anyone else who wants to chime in. Again, no right or wrong answers, but it's this is pretty standard to what I see when I ask this. Is a lot of at the starts and the ends. The reason I asked this at the start is actually because when I was thinking about ways to introduce myself and talk a little bit about my background and kind of my career track, I realized that my career path actually follows those 4 options of the multiple choice test. So I started out my graduate studies, my master's degrees are in English and creative writing, and in those study programs, we never had multiple choice tests. It was all open responses. It was all, what do you think? Can you defend your thoughts about this? There were no multiple choice tests whatsoever. So I started with a never response. I then went and taught at the university level for several years, mostly in the history department. And that was kind of very traditional, classic academic background. And for them, they had midterms and they had finals. And so that was really kind of an at the end version of our multiple choice test. Students would get a midterm exam or they would get a final exam really at the end of a series or a lesson. I then probably for the past 10 years have been in the private sector working with behavioral health organizations, healthcare organizations, tech sector, call centers, those sorts of things. And that's really where I think a lot of my B answer, maybe along the lines of what other people are answering. I was doing a lot of pre and post tests, right? So I do my pre-test, I would say, what do you know about the subject? Then I would teach the subject, and then I would ask the same questions again and say, what do you know now that we've had a chance to review? So a lot of start and the ends. And then what's really interesting now is, as I've gotten into this idea of failure-focused learning, I've started to explore this idea of what it would look like to just ask questions at the start. And I know that there was at least one answer that had kind of thrown up there saying, well, maybe just an at the start test would be an interesting way to do it. And yeah, it totally depends on what kind of questions we're asking, totally depends on what the objectives are. But I just thought it was interesting. And so the main goal of asking that question was to give you a little bit of an introduction as to where my own career track has gone and why I got interested in this failure-based topic. So again, I want to start by talking about what failing to learn means, why we as a learning and development profession, HR profession, training profession, where we see the successes of trial and error, and talk a little bit about our collective flawed history of failure. And again, this is based on some of the research I've done for this book that I just wrote, Fail to Learn. One of the things that I found in my research, I kind of call it this version of an at the start test. There's something called perceptual learning modules. If you've heard of these before, I'd love to hear in the chat. Again, this is just one of the many nodes that I researched, so you might know even more than me. But perceptual learning modules actually came about 1970s, and this idea is that they were self-regulated ways to teach yourself to almost instinctively know answers. This was something that was picked up in the 1980s by a cognitive scientist named Philip Kelman, and he actually used perceptual learning modules, or PLMs, to evaluate how well he could teach novice pilots how to fly planes. And so that's what you're seeing on the screen here. It's kind of an at the start test that this brand new pilot would come sit in at a screen, and they'd see this, readout of random cockpit dials. I have no idea what the right answer for this is, by the way. So a bunch of dials and levers, and what Kelman was trying to figure out is, if I just ask you this question and have you pick an answer, and I give you feedback whether you got it right or wrong, and then I ask you another one, how well and how quickly will you start to learn? Someone's giving me the right answer here. That's awesome. How quickly will you start to learn how to read an actual cockpit? And again, this is the idea that we can just start to drill in, without even teaching you anything yet, get your perception heightened enough that you start to learn something very quickly, even though you're getting, the vast majority of these wrong at the start. What Kelman found out was that novice pilots who spent 1 hour in a perceptual learning module could read these cockpit panels as well as pilots with 1,000 hours of flight time. And I just thought that was incredible. Like how quickly that Kelman was able to show those results. Benedict Carey actually found this research and wanted to test that for himself. So he's a writer. He apparently was really bad at art history. So he created his own art history test where he had someone show him a bunch of paintings, and he had to kind of pick which artistic movement that came from. After an hour of practicing in his own PLM, he was able to identify artistic movements with brand new paintings at an 80% success rate. And there's other resources and examples of how this has been used in other settings as well. Surgical students scored 4 times higher than their peers after just 30 minutes of a PLM session. So there's something here, and this is really where I got interested in what is happening with these kind of fail forward at the start tests that's helping people learn so well. And as I started to explore that, that's where I got into this idea of failure and how failure works with learning. One of the things that I found in my research is certainly a lot of quotes about failure. Anyone seen this one? I don't know how many of you follow hockey? I certainly don't, but this is one that comes from the great Wayne Gretzky. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Anyone recognize this quote? I see some people nodding on the screen. Yeah, very common one, quoted often. I think this was quoted in The Office as well, TV show. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. When we think about failure and putting ourselves out there, this is often one of Gretzky's well-known quotes. Anyone heard of this quote from Gretzky? You only make 17% of the shots that you do take. Maybe a lesser known quote. This is actually a lie. Gretzky didn't actually say this. However, when you look at his career goals, all the goals that he made in his hockey career, divided by the career shots that he took, you actually get an 83% failure rate. To me, this quote is way more interesting than Gretzky's "you miss 100% of the shots you don't take," because it shows me that it's not necessarily about just putting myself out there, because what happens is we're so used to succeeding, and we've dialed into our senses that we're supposed to, as soon as we put ourselves out there, succeed. We don't think about how much failure rates and how often we're supposed to fail. And Gretzky's quote here is a really great example of even one of the greatest hockey players was failing 83% of the time when he was taking these shots. And I got kind of interested in now thinking, is Gretzky an outlier? I mean, he obviously was an outlier in the hockey world. How often and how common is this? And so I created this sort of timeline for myself. And here's another chance for you guys to put some answers or responses in the chat here. What amount of failure do you expect to experience in your career? So think about how often you've tried and failed in your career, professional development life. How many failed projects? How many failed proposals? How many failures you're comfortable carrying with at once? So I got from John, 90%. Others that have their own, and I've got a huge range that I'm excited to share in a minute about what people usually say about this. 80%, lots, absolutely. Others, 80%. When I've managed teams, and this is embarrassing, but like my expected percentage of failure is like 3%. Like I want my team to be perfect, right? I have this ingrained desire that I don't want any failure rate above 5%, that sort of a thing. Anyone deal with like really tight organizations, safety organizations? We really can't have any failure. It's really hard to tell. In past presentations I've done on this, I've gone everywhere. I've gotten results everywhere from 0% all the way up to 99%. So people are all over the spectrum. And it's interesting to kind of, look at where Gretzky is and look at where we are and start to think about when we're leading teams, when we're leading organizations. We might put Gretzky's 100% of the shots you don't take quote on the wall, but we often don't practice that. We're often saying, yeah, I want you to try, but really don't mess up too bad. Or again, when I'm leading safety organizations and teams, I want 100% success rate. I wanted to put a couple other data points up here. And I love the kind of range that we're in right now as this group, 80 to 90%. Someone else that I researched for my book was this guy, James Dyson, Dyson vacuum fame. He very famously said he went through, I think it was 5,127 prototypes before he got to his a successful prototype for his bagless vacuum cleaner. And if you look at that percentage of failure rate, that's 99.99%. So again, we got Gretzky at 83, we've got Dyson at 99%. Another data point that I found where I could just find some easy numbers. Thomas Edison very famously said, I've not failed 10,000 times, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. Even though that was attributed to a couple different of his inventions, people mostly think that was for his Edison battery. So again, that's a failure rate of 99.9999%. It was actually interesting. A startup CEO interviewed a couple hundred different people in the startup world and found that the success ratio for a startup company to make it big also 10,000 to 1. So we have these failure rates, and I love the responses we got on our chat. These failure rates that from 80%, 90%, 99%, we expect, and it looks like this group really expects failure to be something that happens or should happen every day. So my question then is, in training environments, in learning environments, what's our expected pass rate? What expected pass rates do you have when you're trying to teach someone or a class of people things? For me, it is 80%, and that's kind of standard in a lot of my industries. And it was so weird to look at this line and say, what am I doing? What am I doing with my teams, with my audiences, that I'm expecting, especially when I'm expecting them to learn something brand new, I'm expecting them to fail the least amount that's expected in their real life environment. So 80% pass rate compared to what all of the successful people that I'm finding are experiencing in their real life. So anyone else have kind of expected training rates in that same realm? Seen a couple nods there too. Yeah, so how weird is that, right? Like, why do we expect people to fail the least when they're learning something new? And let me pose that question to you. So any reasons why we expect someone to fail the least, or to fail, only 20% of the time when learning something new? Give me some answers as to why we've kind of created training environments like that. One answer I get a lot is compliance. It's just like, I need to, I'm doing InfoSec training, or people need to learn to not click on phishing emails, Scott. So they have to pass my phishing test with 80%. Other reasons we don't fail, put them in the chat for me. Teachers, yeah, absolutely. From teachers, like, I forgot what it's like to not know this information. Once I'm the expert, I want to get up on the room, in front of the room, and lecture to people and kind of say, you should be experts like me after my hour-long lecture. Compliance and safety is often the answer I get, because we expect people to have prepared for the exam and fail during their prep. Sure, yeah. So I want you to take that final test, and I expect you to have done your own studying, your own flashcards, whatever that is. But by the time you get to that test, you need to ace this. Yeah, I'm teaching just to pass, absolutely. And this is big from an L&D professional's perspective, right? If I want people to hire me as a consultant, I want to be able to show, all of my students that take my class get a 90% pass rate. So I have the best students, please hire me. I will train them, and they will ace whatever test you throw in front of them. Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm creating that training, I need to aim for that high watermark. These are all great reasons, definitely ones that I have used myself, still use. There's one other reason why, personally, and again, backed up through the research that I've done, there's one other reason why I think we expect people to fail the least when learning something new. Hasn't been mentioned yet. Here it is. I believe it has to do with pigeons. And let me explain a little bit. This photo, for those that may not recognize it, is a picture from World War II. 1943, I think it was, the US military gave a little-known psychologist named B.F. Skinner $25,000 to see if he could teach pigeons how to steer missiles. This was a real project that happened. It was called Project Pigeon. They also had one working, I write about this later in my book. They also had bats working on how to steer, how to have bat-guided bombs. There were some very weird ideas happening during World War II. But again, B.F. Skinner believed that he could get pigeons to steer missiles. Ultimately, the US decided not to follow through with this project, probably for everyone's benefit. But Skinner did actually prove that he could teach pigeons how to steer. And this nose cone still is in the American History Museum. And it was really interesting because even though he wasn't able to be successful with this one project, you probably know the name B.F. Skinner, right? This is something that's, he's kind of gone on. You might have heard the phrase Skinner boxes. He went on to pioneer this idea of operant conditioning, and that's how he taught these pigeons how to steer, basically. This concept of operant conditioning is, again, you probably know this really well, but the idea that if I associate an action with a reward, I'm going to get more, I'm going to be able to reinforce that connection. So if I can get my pigeons to press a certain lever and get a reward like food, then I'm going to train them how to do everything from, peck buttons to steer missiles. The issue with this is not only did it take off in the 20th century, and Skinner became very, one of the famous 20th century psychologists, but what we're learning now about the whole operant conditioning approach is Skinner really designed his experiment so that pigeons were less likely to make mistakes. And Skinner even has this quote that errors are not a function of learning. And this is where it got really interesting. All of a sudden, we have these different points of view now of, well, we just said that errors happen every day. We said that people, very successful people, Thomas Edison, Wayne Gretzky, James Dyson, they all failed a lot. And yet now we have one of the leading psychologists of the 20th century saying, we don't want to teach through failure. And if we stop and think about how probably most of us went through education systems, failure probably wasn't encouraged. Certainly in the US, it was not, our teachers did not want to encourage their students to fail. And it's really because we came up through this 20th century based education system that was, we want to associate the correct action with a reward. And we only want to, marshmallow experience, absolutely, there you go, another 20th century experiment there. We want to associate the correct action with the reward. And in Skinner's mind, any deviation from that is only going to further reinforce this erroneous path. And so we don't want any mistakes. We just want right answer, right reward, right answer, right reward. The problem with that is that's not how our brains work. And so what's cool about this is finally, after 100 years of operant conditioning, we're starting to take a harder look at Skinner's methods, at operant behaviorist psychology in general, and recognizing that we actually do learn better through failure. Here's what's really crazy. New research shows that even Skinner's pigeons and other behaviorist pigeons were learning faster when they were allowed to make mistakes. So again, Skinner was kind of designing his experiment so that the pigeons were only going to be pecking the right lever. We found that by looking back through the studies, pigeons, when they had a chance to fail and press the wrong lever, they were actually learning faster and learning how to kind of correct their behavior. So the same goes for us humans. There's a great example from a UCLA study that was done that really reinforced this. Two groups, I think these were college groups, were in a math class. One group was given a very traditional academic course, so a lecture, then examples, and then you test yourself, and then you get homework, and then you get a final exam. The other group was just given very confusing math questions with no explanation until right up before the final exam. That second group that just had to struggle and get it wrong and figure out what was going on, they scored 10% higher on that exam, and then 30% higher when both groups were given a brand new subject. So there's something that happens in our brains when we're able to self-correct, mess up, try again, figure out what's going on. And again, we see that play out through not only human experiments, but also pigeon experiments as well. One of the things you might have noticed from my, when Barbara was introducing the book that I wrote, the subtitle is, fail to learn, a manifesto for training gamification. Anyone heard this gamification word before? This is kind of an area of training and of learning and development that I get really, really excited for. One of the problems, as you can probably guess, with this fail first approach is it's really frustrating, right? If you can imagine being that second group of math students, like, I just got a bunch of really confusing problems. What the heck's a logarithm? I don't know what any of these things mean. It can be really easy to get frustrated or to quit. Gamification is the process of using game mechanics to help people stay motivated and engaged and learning things. So the idea of gamifying training is, it's been around for a little bit, but it's really starting to take off as people are recognizing not only the importance of motivation, but the importance of using games as a way to encourage us to fail. And when you think about it, and this is kind of the second part of this talk, games are the one spot in our life where we're actually really encouraged to fail. And even when we were, in these education environments and really our teachers were not wanting us to fail at all and really wanting us to be just getting the right answer, we always would get these breaks where we'd go out and play, or we'd go home from school and we'd be playing video games. And these games were the one spot where we really can fail without any sort of consequence. There's a great quote from this game designer named Jesper Juhl, who says, "We have the option of denying that game failure matters." And I love this quote because, again, when I think about it, I'm always hard on myself. I'm always hard on teams that I lead whenever someone messes up, because I just have this ingrained knee-jerk reaction, even after studying this, to beat myself up for when I mess something up. However, in a game-based environment, it's okay to lose. In fact, it's almost expected to lose in a game. So much so that when you look at some of the data of gaming environments, the gaming world actually had to create a whole new word to describe the idea of death because it happens so often in a gaming environment. In 2014, there was this game called Dark Souls 2 that came out as, I think, one of the best games, won an award for being one of the best games of the year. In 2014, people who were playing Dark Souls 2 were dying at a rate of 150,000 times per hour. That's actually 23 times higher than the real death rate in the real world. So people die in games so often that the game world actually has to create this phrase, death versus permadeath. So anyone know what permadeath means? Any gamers out there? Permadeath is something I wasn't aware of at all before I started this research. It's this idea that certain games, because you die and you lose and you fail all the time in gaming environments, most of the times in games, you can just start over. You can go back to your last save point. Certain games wanted to create this actual sense of real death, like your character actually dies. You have to start all the way back at the beginning. So the idea that the gaming world actually had to invent this new concept of death just to differentiate between our normal day-to-day failures and the actual character death you might experience where you have to reset the game was really fascinating to me. So again, in gaming worlds, we fail so often that not only are we vastly exceeding the failure rates of the real world, but we actually have to create entirely new concepts for what it means to fail and die in a game. And what this tells us is that games actually require failure. So we're very loss averse as humans in general. And there's some great research about how loss averse we are. And it's terrifying almost how much we will try to avoid a failure. However, we don't mind losing and learning during games. And in fact, we actually expect to fail in a game. And I can prove it here by playing a game with you right now. So let's get ready. I'm going to give you a one-button game. This is something I am happy to say is up for sale. You guys can buy this one-button game from me if you'd like. Here it is. All you have to do is push this button and you win my game. So anyone want to give me like $30, $50 for this game? That's kind of what the going rate is for commercial games right now. Anyone interested? All you have to do is push the button and you win. My guess is there probably won't be many takers, right? Why? Because this is a super boring game, turns out. This again comes from the game designer Jesper Juhl, when he's kind of making this point that we actually want failure and challenge in our gaming environments. And so my activity for you now is help me fix my one-button game. Let's turn this into something that's a little more successful. What can you add to make my game more enjoyable? Give me some examples in the chat. If you had to take this one-button game and make it somehow exciting or interesting, what would you do? Hide the button, absolutely. Play against friends, yeah, make it a competition. Make it a race, maybe. What else? Someone I talked to in the last session, they said electrify the button, which I don't know what the result will be, but I thought that was very interesting. That would certainly make it more exciting. Reward system, fastest rim, yeah, code, absolutely. I love these ideas. You're already giving me, this is going to be a way better game once I'm done with this talk now. Inverse logic, yeah. So some sort of logic surrounding or quiz-based things surrounding these play blinds. Electrocuted presidential candidates upon winning. Very interesting one. Very topical. Love it. Absolutely. So what you guys, when we go back through this list, what we're describing here is opportunities for failure, right? That's basically what we're adding is all these different opportunities to fail. So whether that's a level system where maybe you're going to miss a level, whether I surround my buttons with guards, basically the way we make games enjoyable and fun is we give people chances to fail. And this should be the same thing that we're doing in real life. And that's kind of the point to drive home here is that that's the same way that we should approach training worlds. That's the same way we should approach standing up organizations. We want that sense of a healthy challenge, and gamifying something is the strategic way of looking at how do I include those elements in the right manner that makes them motivational, exciting, fun to play, all of the things like that. Very cool. So with that in mind, I wanted to give you guys a couple of takeaways now to kind of drive us home here. This was all like the high level concepts of, why do we fail? What are some of the rates around that? What's some of the history that's given us such a difficult path for understanding failure, and how do we use games to work on that? Here's 3 ways that you can bring what we've learned about failure-based learning into your environments. And we'll talk about each one of these. And I'm going to ask you guys some questions about these. So be ready on your chats. 3 ways that you can do this today, now, next time, next project you have. Number 1, increase your feedback rate. Number 2, decrease your failure cost. And we'll talk about what that means. And then number 3, put the hardest questions up front. So we know that all 3 of these work really well, and there's a few reasons for that. Number 1, they've been studied on this. So we actually have learning studies for each of these things that show, yes, increasing feedback rate results in stronger learning outcomes. Yes, decreasing failure costs results in stronger learning outcomes. Putting the hard questions, that UCLA study I already mentioned, showed that can be effective. But we also know that these work because this is how we play games. And I'll take you through a couple of my favorite games, and we can take a look at how increasing feedback rate, decreasing failure cost, and putting hard questions up front creates that sort of excitement and engagement no matter what your audience is. So let's start with increased feedback rate. This is the very first screen on the very first level of Super Mario Brothers. Some gaming expert better than me might be able to tell me which Super Mario Brothers. I can't even remember. I think this might be Super Mario 2? I don't know. I started playing Mario on Game Boy. I think this was the Nintendo version. But again, when you plug in the game and turn it on, this is the first screen that you have. You kind of have to assume, okay, I'm this little plumber-looking guy in the corner of the screen. Here's my questions for you. So even if you haven't played Mario at all, you should be able to answer this. Looking on this very first screen, what are some of the feedback elements you can see? And take feedback, define feedback however you'd like, but what are some of the things that you would see that would give me, the player, the learner, feedback here? Any ideas? Movement? Yeah. So I got this controller thing in my hand. I push a button and the little guy moves. Oh, cool. I thought maybe I was the mushroom on the other side, but when I push this button, this guy moves. That must be me. Angry mushroom. Yeah. That angry looking little Goomba guy, he's moving toward me and he's frowning. So even just being able to read a facial feature, right? That's feedback for me. I'm processing that as okay, well, he looks angry. I want to see if I want to move him. Question mark boxes, absolutely, right? So I go up, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this, but I push this one button and the box changes color, this little coin pops up and I get a point. Cool, okay. So everything that I'm seeing here is an opportunity for feedback, which is, again, when you think about how someone designed this game, and also when you think about designing our own courses, programs, organizational developments, think about how often and how much feedback you're including here. There's a ton of feedback opportunities just in this first screen. Here's another question for you now. How long, let's say that I start my game, that little angry guy's on the move, things are kind of happening. How long before I know if I've lost, like in terms of seconds or minutes or hours? How long, if I don't do anything, how long will it take before I know that I've lost? Immediately. Yeah. 10 seconds, maybe. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to know really quick if I don't push the right button at the right time that, that angry guy runs into me. I fall off the screen and I get immediate feedback that says, oh, I need to try something else. Maybe I should try this little jump button, or maybe what happens if you run at him really fast? Nope, that didn't work. What happens if I jump on his head? Oh, cool. He flattened out. That must be good news. Now think about how quick that feedback happens on this game and compare it to the last course you led, the last training you've delivered. How long before one of your trainees got feedback? And for me, I shudder to think about this because when I was teaching in academics, it was like weeks, it was months. It was like, hey, come to these 10 lectures, self-correct, do some reading. I want you to read these 5 books, and then I'll give you an exam in a month or in 6 months. And I'll give you some feedback finally to let you know whether or not you're on track. Even from an industry standard example, if anyone's ever worked with learning management systems, the tools that we use to build a lot of our courses, if you look at a lot of those authoring tools, they are designed and engineered to automatically give feedback only at the end of a quiz. And that seemed so weird to me as I researched this, because what we should be seeing is as fast as we can give feedback, you should be doing it. So why not give feedback after every question? And for some reason, our industry just kind of assumes, well, you don't want to do that much feedback. Just give it to them at the very end of this. Our game environments and our game-based communities and our failure to learn communities say that's not true. And they have the studies to back that up. So the faster we can build in feedback loops and feedback environments, even when they're 5 seconds, 10 seconds, are going to be essential to us. So that's the first thing to think about. How do we increase that feedback rate? Second opportunity here, decrease your failure cost. This is kind of a standard game over screen. And I'm sure if you've played any sort of video game, board games even, every game has that loss state. What's cool about this is almost all of those kind of game over screens has an opportunity to start playing again immediately, right? So I've just failed, I lost all my lives. What do I have to do to start playing again? Oh, I push this X button. Cool, that's all I need to do. How often does this happen in our learning environment? So again, think about when you've been teaching someone something, what is the penalty for failing? And again, my own terrible examples from past lives. If you failed my course, you had to take the course again. Like you get a low enough grade on the final exam because you weren't quizzing yourself or reading enough of my books. You got to go up and re-enroll and spend another 3 months, another 6 months in taking my class. That is a ridiculously high punishment. And I shudder to think about how often we are discouraging people from trying and failing and trial and error just because the punishment is so high. And again, when you look at standard authoring tools for learning management systems or online courses, they will set a default repeat it was set as a default for a quiz, 1 repetition option. So if you fail this quiz, you get 1 chance to retry it, and then that's it. Usually you can find a way to work around that, but I just think it's weird that as an industry, we've kind of assumed that, well, you get 1 chance, if you mess up, you get one chance to try it again, and then that's it, we're done with you. And when you think about our failure ratios from, Edison, where's the other 9,999, failures that I might need to take before I get that successful prototype? Absolutely. Cool. I'm seeing some cool things in the chat. I'll have to go back and make sure I hit on those. But hopefully these are starting to spark some ideas in you. This last one's one of my favorites. This came from a game that I played as a teenager. This is, I think, Doom 2, playing on my big clunky PC. What I love about Doom 2 and what I love about so many games, it is Doom 2, perfect. I'm glad I got that right. What I remember from this game is that they had this thing called Nightmare Mode. I think it was called Nightmare Mode, at least. It was the mode where it was so hard and there were like monsters coming at you immediately and you had no idea what was going on, and it was terrifying and chaotic and so much fun. And the thing that I loved about it is they had this screen before you started that said, are you sure that you want to play this skill level? This isn't even remotely fair. And I thought, how cool is that screen? And it was so much fun to get into that screen and feel like I'm going to accept that challenge. What's weird though is like how often could that happen in a learning environment? How often could we go to our learners, are you sure you want to take this class? This isn't even remotely fair. It's so hard. Just get out of here while you can. And the fact that we haven't really built up that trust and that sense of enjoyment and excitement and failure doesn't allow us to do that often in our learning environments. The good news is if we combine some of these other lessons like high feedback rates and low failure cost, we really can be able to put the hardest questions up front and have these kind of challenging, exciting modes that people get so thrilled to do, knowing that they can get quick feedback, fail and start again without any sort of major cost. And that's where you get those really engaged learners. So I'm going to end here, and then I'll circle back and make sure I'm touching on some questions with this idea of a failure feedback loop. So I put some of these kind of real world lessons together, and this is the way that I start to now design a lot of my courses and a lot of my organizational development opportunities, learning opportunities. I sit down with my subject matter experts and I say, what are those impossible scenarios that you really want to avoid in whatever situation we're trying? So an information security client might say, we don't want a data breach. Okay, cool. I'm going to give your students a data breach immediately. I want them to solve that impossible challenge or at least be confronted with it. What is that kind of immediate feedback loop that I can create? So how can I make sure that they're getting really quick feedback that's low cost, that doesn't punish them excessively or embarrass them excessively? And then as they can get that feedback, what is the strategies they want to learn or practice, or who can they interview, or what's the resource they can go find The reason I put that bottom one in dashed lines is if you've ever had to design a course or lead a team through something, that's probably where that's where we're used to staying, right? So Scott, you have to teach a course on information security. Oh, cool. I better put together an hour-long lecture about the strategies of information security, and I've gathered, some key bullet points about information security. So you should just sit and listen to me. That's usually where we camp out in our training development. What I encourage us to do is to really let students and let the learners drive that part on their own. Don't focus your courses on that element. Instead, try to create those impossible situations, create those challenging data breach scenarios where everything is on fire and people are running around panicking. Give them that immediate feedback so they can try and fail. And we go back to those pilot cockpit studies. Think about how many times they had to fail to guess that correctly before their brain started to kick in and learn. And this is how you can create a great feedback loop where the students actually become the ones who go out and figure out, how do I need to create a new strategy. I need to figure out how to get better at my information security here. So there's a resource I want to find, or there's an expert I want to interview. And all we have to do as designers and industry leaders is figure out what are those impossible scenarios and how do we create that low-cost feedback. Best way to do that is we kind of create our own, I call it a guild. What's that guild of stakeholders? And these people really enjoy coming up with impossible scenarios. That probably serves that devilish side of ours. Like, I want to give someone the hardest scenario that I can possibly think of. What's the nightmare scenario that I had to live through? And then how do I take those behaviors and then make sure that I'm creating a gauntlet that students have to run through, whether that's, a gamified environment, whether that's just a multiple choice quiz that people are trying and failing over and over and over again. This is what creates really great results. So this is the part I will make sure that I'm walking the right line, because I'm so excited I was so excited to get this feedback from a client. I literally just yesterday, but I'm also under an NDA with them. So I will speak in generalizations here. I was brought in to consult with a group. They had an audience of people who were having to escalate a lot of their challenges with their customers. They wanted to do a training scenario, and they were kind of expecting to do, lectures and classrooms and tests and then get people back on the floor. What I did instead was, we didn't have a lot of time, so I just they were kind of boring, but I just created multiple choice quizzes, and I had a lot of them. And people were initially worried because our pass rate, the success rate of those multiple choices were around 70%. And usually when people see 70%, they start thinking C average, and they think these people aren't really good. And what do we need to worry about? What was cool is that the escalations, even though people were getting 70% on these quizzes, the actual business outcomes improved by 20% over like a month. So it was so great to see and to kind of upset this idea that people think they need to have this direct line between happy trainees and happy business outcomes. You can have people get frustrated and have people confused about your challenge that you're giving them in a safe training environment. It doesn't matter if you mess up my multiple choice quiz, no one's life gets ruined. And even if those percentages are low, you actually can get great real world results out in the front lines of their customer groups. So it was really great to see. I'm hoping I can get a little bit more data from this group that they released, so I can actually publish this and share some more metrics with you guys. But it was really cool to see that this is actually starting to play out in the real world. So that's a bit for me. I wanted to pause here and make sure I'm going back through the chat and answer any questions that come up. Certainly happy to talk through how do you pitch this to teams or stakeholders or stuff like that. These are the resources I also have. So the book that I wrote, Fail to Learn, is out on Amazon now. And the other thing that I want to offer, and I'll put this in the chat now, is this PDF resource, which is my gamification model of guilds and gauntlets and how do you kind of gamify something. So as questions are coming in or as people are sorting through those, I'm going to go into our chat and make sure I upload that file. And then I'm excited to hear questions as they come.
Perfect. Thanks for that. So if anyone's got any questions, if you want to pop them in the chat.
You've got a couple there.
Yeah, I've got them here. So we've got one from John here. So John's asking, have you found that people then go off and ask more questions and do more research?
The best way to do that, and actually, so yeah, great question. the way that I define it in this, so I just uploaded this gamification model to the chat, so you're welcome to download that. It's also in the book too, where I kind of explain it out in more detail. Well, the way I answer that is I call them temples, but I want to create around this gauntlet of challenging scenarios and, slashing swords or, dangerous phishing emails. I want to create enough temples of information that my students know that they can quickly exit that gauntlet, lick their wounds, go find out a piece of information, and then jump back in. So how do I encourage people to do that? I would just want to make them available. So instead of forcing everyone into a classroom, I might say, hey, I'm doing a Q&A session on Friday. I'm going to give you guys this gauntlet to go through on Wednesday and see how you do. It just as a warning, it's going to be super challenging. You're probably not going to get very far, but I'm available on Friday if you want to show up and see how to get better. My attendance rate is going to be way better in that class after people have had a chance to kind of go through the bumps of it and go, oh, you know what, I've got that resource in Scott, or Scott's given me a PDF that I can download, or a podcast to listen to. Making sure that I have kind of multiple learning paths available, just putting them out there because I've given them that challenge that they are just staring at now and know that they want to get through. That's really the best way to encourage it. It's a really great question though.
Good stuff. Ravi's asking, does the failure environment increase the time to answer the question, even if the learning is greater?
I would say that it actually decreases the time to answer a question. And the only reason I say that is the most common way that I design these questions is kind of getting based on that perceptual learning module of like, how can I quickly analyze the information and answer it without even knowing maybe the subconscious connections that I'm building in my brain. So you looking at that cockpit example, people getting asked these questions about how to read a cockpit very quickly. The point of the perceptual learning module is don't think about it too much. Just try to answer these questions and start to build those connections, and you'll start to recognize, even maybe before you're consciously aware of it, what you're reading and connecting. So I would say the ability to fail actually increases one's kind of activity and enthusiasm. One of the other answers to that, ways to answer that, I write about this in my book. My brother is a very avid gamer. I am not. And I write about the scenario where he and I started playing this new game, and it was kind of a collaborative first-person shooter game, and it still just sticks in my head because I had my little shooter thing, and they dropped my character in, and I immediately ducked behind this crate because I didn't want to get shot. And my brother dashed out into this, this war zone, immediately gets shot, and then respawns behind me and dashes out again, and it gets shot again, and then dashes out, and I'm still kind of ducking back and kind of seeing what's happening. And every time he's still getting a little bit farther, he's getting a little farther, he's kind of learning where the next spot is. And I realized like that's actually how he and I approach learning too. I'm very hesitant to fail. I don't want to appear dumb. So I will take very hesitant steps. And kind of circling back to the initial question, he learns way faster than me because he's willing to kind of take those mistakes and take those kind of quick exits and say, well, it doesn't matter. There's no cost to respawn. I'm just going to jump back out there. Oh, no, don't go left, go right instead. And that's a great way for him to build that kind of awareness and learning.
Awesome. John is asking, how do you sell playing games to the managers?
That's a really great question, and something that the gamification community gets a lot. I'd say the shortest answer is sometimes you just get the manager or the stakeholder that doesn't want to hear games, and so I switch it to call it motivation. So motivating and engaging learners, that's really what gamification is. But that's I've learned throughout my years that sometimes that's just the easier route, is just saying, you know what, I'm not even going to call this a game because I know that the wall goes up as soon as I say that, and you're saying I'm not pulling my 100 people off the floor to teach them to play a game. So, okay, cool. This is motivation environments instead. That's the easiest way to do it. I would say the other way is bringing some of these data points in has been really helpful. There's some great, cited in the book. You can also reach out to me. I can give you some great studies about how gamification actually does boost environments, engagement, activity scores, those sorts of things. Other ways that I've done it in the past is kind of pointing out how much of our life is gamified. Anyone have like a rewards card, or like points for their credit cards or their shopping cards or things like that? That's gamification 101. That's like, hey, we're going to reward you with these points toward this silver status, which is meaningless outside of this little bubble that we're in, but we're using game elements and motivational elements to get you to become a repeat customer. same concept. So usually there's a stakeholder or manager in the room that goes, oh yeah, I've got my executive status platinum, traveler's card, and I really want to get my gold status. So, I want to avoid dropping down a level. So if you're doing it, then your learner should be able to do it too.
One from Pritam saying, isn't there a lot of overhead in terms of figuring out the material and all the different ways in which to fail?
There often is that concern. I would say that there certainly can be. If my personal approach to this is, I want to build like the shoestring budget gamified or training approach. Actually, last year, one of these games I built on setting effective goals won Training Magazine's award for a no-tech gamified solution, specifically because I wanted to build something in 20 hours and not 3 months or something like that. I wanted to build it for a few $100s rather than several thousand. So there are certainly ways around it. I would definitely be wary of going out and kind of buying any sort of like fancy authoring tool or gamified system. You don't need to start with that. Again, the goal setting game that I built was a deck of cards that I was able to kind of set some rules for and some motivation and some points for, that was really effective in training people. This course that I just am doing with this current client was multiple choice quizzes built in Google Forms because we had a week to launch it. And so I would say I guess the shorter answer is the mechanics are kind of hardwired within us. We don't want to fail. We want to be challenged. We want to learn. You can harness those in very kind of budget-friendly ways, whether that's a quiz questions or a card deck or whatever that might be.
I think you've given a couple of examples for this one, but I'm going to ask anyway. Mark says, the only gamification I've experienced in training is giving people points for completing a module, then having a leaderboard of the trainees. It seems quite token. Can you give a training examples that uses the concept you've talked about?
Yes, absolutely. I love that I'm so glad this question was asked. There's something in the gamification community called PBLs, or points, badges, leaderboards, and they are used all the time. And it's gotten to the point where I absolutely agree. They've kind of lost their value. And in the gamification world, we kind of roll our eyes when we see just PBLs, like, oh, this is another points-based system. Because you're right, it's the fact that you're going to give me points for completing a training. What am I going to do with your points? Like, why does that matter to me? It's a great example of kind of extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. So some examples then, what are some new ways to gamify something? Carl Kapp is a great resource. He's another person I cite in my book. He talks about structural gamification versus content gamification. Structural gamification is those points, those badges, who's ahead of who on the leaderboard. Content gamification involves things like, how do I tell a story? And again, I would put failure in more of that content. When I fail a game, that wounds me deeply, or I'm like, if I feel like it wasn't fair in the game, I'm like deeply offended, or if I felt like it was fair, but I just messed up, I'm mad at myself. This is much more of an intrinsic motivator to succeed and move forward. What I think is interesting is you can still do that in very basic ways. My favorite example of this is, imagine let's say a training environment, and we're going to teach you how to make a widget, and we're going to do that through this lesson. And if you complete the lesson, you are going to get 100 points. Okay, cool. That's very basic gamification. With just a simple word change, I bet I can change how you internally are processing that. Welcome to this training. We're going to build these widgets. At the end of this, you're going to save 100 hostages. Holy crap, what are we talking about? I just changed points to hostages, but I've created this narrative in your mind that at least has you, if nothing else, slightly more interested in what happens if I don't get 100, like what happens to that? Like, what's the narrative behind that? What are we involved in, or what are we doing here? And I've just kind of created this hint or this thread of a narrative that is taking you maybe just a half step forward without doing any extra work on my part.
A couple more. You okay to keep answering questions, or?
Yeah, I'm great. I apologize if I get too excited about this, but yeah, this has been fun.
True. So John's asking about how we do this in the new online training world, and do we need to take a different approach?
Yeah, I think with online trainings, I would again say that my biggest caution is avoiding the fancy authoring tools and learning management systems. You'll probably also find, I see this a lot, when I go online, there's a lot of there's a lot of packages and products out there that say they're gamified, but whoever was pointing this out earlier, usually that just means, oh, we have a way of keeping track of your scores. Yeah, we don't need to worry about that so much. So I would say go out into that online world with a little bit of caution, because those fancy, several $1,000 subscriptions a month sort of a thing isn't your only way into gamification. And again, my goal with this book and with this sort of concept is motivators and game-based mechanics, like a sense of failure, is hardwired into who we are as people. It's how we've been raised. It's how we were educated, and you can manipulate that in the most beneficial sense. Manipulate that. You can manipulate that to get people really engaged in your topics without any of the fancy bells and whistles. They certainly make it, if you've got a strong core base, they can make it really fun. There's some great games out there about learning the ins and outs of healthcare system by fighting zombies, which is this 3D world. It's very, very cool. But it's not necessary to kind of tap into the core motivators of why people get excited about something.
Putin's asking, I can see this approach being useful in programming, but is it still valid for quantum mechanics?
For quantum mechanics, I would hope so. I love the idea that you could build this into a quantum mechanic realm. I would say that my approach to that topic would probably be very similar to how I approached any of my clients, which is really, okay, what's the challenge? Like, imagine the most dire quantum mechanics scenario that we're dealt with, which I don't know what, the implosion of the universe, multiple time dimensions, whatever that challenging scenario is, and then let's throw people right into that and let them kind of figure it out on their own. But you're right. Like, I mean, obviously a kind of in and out of how to push a button or how to write a code or how to answer a phone, this can be pretty straightly applied to. For general concepts still, I would say that this does apply, because you can always tie that back into what's your success metric? What do you want to get people to do? And can you challenge them to do that right out of the gate, rather than feeling like you have to lecture to them or have them sit through, pages and pages of books or hours and hours of lecture before they get a chance to try it out for themselves. These are great questions too. This is fun.
I've got a really good one from Greg here. Is this aimed more at adult groups more than children? Schooling for children has always been much more based on a punishment model, and I do not see much sign of this changing. Yeah,
it's so true. And I think what's funny is when you think about it from a game-based point of view, this is where I think we as adults and adult learners can learn more from kids. I think kids are way more willing to try something and fail. Even just from my personal life, right? I've got a 1-year-old kid who's just learning how to walk, and I can't believe how many times she's willing to wipe out and get back up without even a whimper, because she just kind of expects that I'm going to fall every third step right now. And that's just the name of the game. It is sad though, because you're totally right. Our traditional education systems are really meant to kind of swoop in every time that fall happens and say, no, you're never supposed to fall. Don't do that. Kind of walk. Here's all the guides to make sure you're walking correctly. I think left to their own devices, kids are more than happy to try and fail way better than we are once we kind of get into this world of competition and, one-upsmanship and all of those things that come with adult life. So I think I see a lot of gamification is really trying to tap into that childlike sense that exists before the formalized structures. There's also some great books out there on kind of the next generation of teachers who are trying to break that mold a bit. That gaming brother of mine is actually a 4th grade teacher right now. So I think I'm very proud of him to see how he runs his classes with, I'm not giving homework. What I'm going to give is I'm going to give you this test tube with this other beaker, and I'm going to see what kind of a mess you can make, kind of a thing. I love seeing that happening in younger groups, because that's where I think the future of education is.
Good stuff. Any more questions?
I will also say, for some reason, if there's a question you want to ask, or one that's half formed in your head right now that you want to send out to me, please do drop me a line. As you can tell, I get really excited. I will probably write you back a novel of all of these thoughts with all of these links. But here's my email address, my website. Happy to be around for any sort of follow-ups. yeah, it's really fun.
We've got another one here from Pritam saying, does gamification intrude into the real world, i.e. Formula One racing game and learning to drive?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we see gamification elements all over the place in our lives. The example I use most often is that kind of rewards based, card member. But yeah, we get them in any sort of limits, rewards, systems that we use, narratives that we create in our daily lives. Gamification and game-based mechanics are drawing from that reality. Who's the enemy that I need to conquer today? Today, it's probably my anxiety of watching all this politics. The narratives that we create in our heads are used for game-based environments all the time. And Dr. Jane McGonigal has a great book about how to use game-based learning and gamification to conquer things like PTSD. She was dealing with chronic migraines and kind of created her own system called Super Better that she uses to kind of help move her through these debilitating conditions that she and others were dealing with. But the idea of finding power-ups in your day, finding allies to kind of help fight against boredom or fear, any of those things that we're dealing with. Those are really all tapping into our sense of what it means to play.
Awesome. Any last questions from anyone?
Yes, sorry, I saw the chat there. I'll put her name in here, Dr. Jane McGonigal. She has a book called Reality is Broken, and also one called Super Better. I think I cite both. I think I used both of those in my writing and research, just because, yeah, she's got some amazing stuff. She actually, one of her studies showed that people that play Tetris right after experiencing a traumatic event have less symptoms of PTSD. She's got some really just crazy research around game playing and the kind of positive physical and psychological benefits of it. Good name, nice.
Any last takers for questions? Last chance. Oh, we've got the last one from Jim. Why do clients engage with you? What problems are they trying to solve?
Great question. Usually it's the question that I ask on my website is, let me see if I can pull up to find my website here. Actually, I can just go here. You can still see this. Yeah, what shall we build? What sorts of problems are you trying to solve? This is usually what clients come to me for is, hey, I'm realizing that my training material is just wasting people's time because they're sitting in a classroom and the results aren't changing at all. Or I've got something really important that I need to teach this group of people, but I don't know how. That's often where I kind of come in, and I've got this great, actually, if anyone is interested, you're welcome to come to the site. There's a like 5-minute questionnaire that I do that basically gives you an analysis of what are you trying to teach people, and then what are some of the best ways to do it, because chances are a classroom lecture is not the best way for whatever you're teaching. It fits a very, very specific niche of learning, but people kind of assume that, well, that's just the way I was taught everything, so I probably better get everyone into my classroom and teach them the same thing. So you're welcome to fill one of these out. It's just a couple of questions, but yeah, oftentimes it's people coming to me saying, I want to teach someone something, but I don't know how to do it. And it's one of my favorite things to do is to say, okay, cool. What's the end result? Like, what do you want? What's the ideal world you imagine for your learners in 3 months or 3 weeks? And it's that, oh, I want them to be, all-star phone answering customers, or I want them to be the best, coders in the world right now. Okay, cool. How do we do that? And then we can kind of create systems and programs around how to build toward that amazing result. And again, I was so excited to see this latest client result, because their goal was, I want to reduce, my customer complaint rates or my escalation metrics by X%. And the fact that we kind of shoestringed a program together didn't really matter who was liking the program or completing the program. What mattered is, did that percentage move at the end? And if it did, great. Let's find ways to duplicate that.
And there's one from Pritam here saying, what metrics do you collect? So
the metrics that I focus on, I stick kind of with the basic Kirkpatrick model. I don't know if people are familiar with that. Let me put that in the chat too. Kirkpatrick levels of training evaluation. I don't remember if I'm saying that exactly right. Donald Kirkpatrick has this kind of 4 basic levels of training evaluation. The first one is, did people, I'm butchering what he actually calls these, but number 1, did people like this? And that's usually measured by your training surveys, right? That's like usually measured by my post-class, like, hey, did you like this course? Was the instructor prepared? Did he show up on time? That sort of a thing. That's your first level. Level 2 is your learning. How much did people learn? And that's usually measured by that pre-post, right? So what was our score at the beginning? Then we took the class. What was our score at the end? There we go. Thanks, John. Great link to the Kirkpatrick model right there. So that's level 2. Level 3 is behaviors. So what are people actually doing out in the real world? And then level 4 is the business impact. The biggest thing that I'm noticing, and this is what I'm really hoping to publish on next, is I think people look at those 4 levels as, oh, I should be getting really high scores on all of those levels. And my argument is, if I can get really high scores in levels 3 and 4, I care way less about levels 1 and 2. And it's not that I want all of my learners to be mad at me or to like hate me and to never want to take one of my classes again. But if I can prove to you that by taking this class, which is going to be very frustrating and very challenging, and you're going to bomb the final exam, but when you get out into the real world, you're going to have these amazing results in your real life, and it's going to impact your business in this really measurable way. That's really what I care about. And that's what your boss cares about and your leadership group cares about. So I think my biggest soapbox that I'm getting on next is let's stop thinking about this in this linear way of measuring 1, 2, 3, 4, and all of them have to be great. Let's maybe say, can we sacrifice 1 and 2 even, and challenge people enough so that they're frustrated at that, or that they're getting 60% pass rates instead of 100, but they're moving the needle in the business world in a much more tangible way. Yeah, absolutely. So I saw this chat pop up. Yeah, so exams at the end, great, whatever. But what about 6 months after that? And yes, there's absolutely benefits to follow-up studies of that. And again, that for me comes way down to the, how do we measure in the real world? Are people retaining this knowledge? Hey, it's great that your whatever call escalation rate went down right after my training, but what happened 3 months after that? Did people forget? And do we need to create some sort of ongoing challenge or activity that keeps people's knowledge boosted up? Absolutely, yeah. Great point from John too, right? We need to start thinking differently about this. And I was so surprised with how much pushback I was getting from these like lower exam scores. People were really freaking out. Like, Scott, your training, people are getting 60% and 70. Like, do we have, are we hiring the right people for this because they're failing your quizzes? And it was that idea, like, no, we need to, like, they're failing in a training environment. That's what they should be doing. Like, we need to design stuff more like that. And we need to not panic when someone bombs a quiz, because that's what quizzes are meant to do. In fact, if anything, I want to quiz them 100 more times, and I want them to fail 99 more times out of that, because that's just going to encourage that knowledge. And all I need to do is then create the kind of motivational environments to make sure they don't get so frustrated that they, up and leave or something like that. So how can I make this more fun and engaging, so it's not failing a quiz and getting an F, but, navigating a plumber through angry mushrooms?
Awesome. Any last questions? No, I think we're good. So just a massive thank you for that, Scott. That was really, really interesting. So big round of applause for you from everybody. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It was so much fun. Really looking forward to keeping these conversations going. So please do, drop me a line. I will put my email in here. But yeah, anytime you've got questions or things for me, I'm always happy to talk through any of this.
Perfect. So thank you again for coming along tonight and talking to us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Coming up next for the Future of Work Scotland, we have AI changes on November the 18th with Donald Clark, which should be a really interesting talk as well. And then after that, we've got on the Wednesday, the 2nd of December, we've got Managing Products, a reality check with Mark Abraham. So I hope that all of you will come along and join us for one or two of them. So thank you very much for coming along this evening. Any last minute shout outs? Can you think of anything?
No, there's coming up. Just to say that one in December is our last one of the year.
Yes.
So hopefully we'll see a lot of the community join us for that. We hope to make it a little bit festive, go out with a bang. It's brighten up. Tough year that has been for us all. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you there.
Finally see the end of 2020.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming along again tonight, guys. And thank you, Scott. And have a lovely evening.
Take care. Bye.
So good to see you. Take care.